Leaves from a Russian Diary. Pitirim Sorokin. Part 2. 1918. Chapter 11. Wandering.
The Bolsheviki were concentrating Red forces in Ustya-Kotlas, the hand of Cheka fell more and more heavily, and arrests and searches were hourly occurrences. Ustya took on the appearance of a place near the battle front, and the day of revolution in Archangel seemed very near. No information from our comrades reached us however, nor did my promised certificate arrive. What had happened? Was there misunderstanding among the leaders? At the beginning of August every sign of the overthrow at Archangel became apparent. The communist authorities prepared to leave Ustya and Kotlas and even went on board the steamers, taking with them many hostages from the towns and all the money and treasure they could lay hands on. Our quarters seemed safe, but one night a friend woke me from sleep, warning me that the 12 steamers of the Bolshevist Armada, defeated at Archangel, were approaching Ustya. All members of the staff had been similarly aroused and we spent the rest of the night hiding in the woods. What was to be done? We had received no word from Archangel or Vologda, and we did not know whether the Armada was being pursued by the anti-Bolshevist forces or not. The Armada, we learned, was in a panic, and we thought that our small forces might possibly disorganize it. Praying for reinforcements from Archangel, we prepared a barge to be sunk in the Sukona to prevent the further retreat of the Bolshevist steamers. In the afternoon one of the sailors of the Armada, a member of our group, came to my shelter, begging me to fly from Ustya as the Bolshevists on the steamers had sworn to shoot me. But I told him to wait until they caught me. That evening we reached the conclusion that our plan for stopping the Bolshevist steamers was impractical, because our forces were too small to act without support. Within a few days the situation would be clearer. If the Bolshevists successfully resisted us, the only effect of our work will be executions of hostages and a general orgy of blood. 3 days passed. No news. No signs of the approach of our allies. The Armada indeed recovered itself, new troops arrived from Vologda, and a general increase of the terror ensued. No further resistance on our part being possible, we went into hiding in the woods bordering the wild river. Hope had almost died from our hearts. At last we heard that the anti-Bolshevist troops had been stopped at Berezhniki, about 300 miles away. This gave us assurance that they would not approach Ustya at all and that the only salvation for us was now, by forced marches to reach Archangel. Meanwhile preparing to go to Archangel, we decided to stay some time near Ustya, and so dividing in several groups, having agreed on means of communication, and embracing each other we parted.
Farewell, friends. May Russia live forever.
Farewell, farewell, until better days.
Alas, for many of us a next meeting never came. Bravely these patriots died for Russia and are now sleeping in eternal peace. My first objective was a village where I spent 2 days with a peasant friend, and then went on to another village, beginning a long series of wanderings around Ustya. To live secretly in a Russian village, where every stranger excites curiosity, is no easy thing. In the midst of civil war, when spies were everywhere, for 100 friends might be ready to give you shelter, you never knew whether there might be some ready to betray you. Writing this history, I feel like expressing the deepest gratitude for those good and brave peasants who, at great risk to themselves, did shelter me and pass me on from one place to another. If my head at this moment is on my shoulders, it is because of these faithful Ivans who warned me of every danger, gave me every comfort they could, arranged communications between me and my wife, in a word, tried in every way to help me. Days passed with no news except a cheerful letter which said that while the Chekists did not know whether I was in Ustya or Archangel, they had broadcasted my photographs with orders to shoot me instantly if arrested. The terror in Ustya had become more ferocious and the student Vigilny, one of the most energetic of our staff, had been taken. Poor Vigilny. God help you, I sighed. I fear this finishes your drama. On the morning of my second day's stay in the house of a peasant friend, a man came to the door and asked his way to Galyueva. I could see that he was in disguise, but I gave him the directions saying, "Who do you want to see in Galyueva?" I am a teacher there and know everybody.
Oh, I was told that it was possible to buy flour in Galuva, so I am going there.
Better go to Voznesini, I suggested. Galueva is a very poor village and you can get nothing there. Where are you from?
From Gryazovets.
He answered. Repeating my advice to go to the richer village of Voznesini, I bade him goodbye and watched him walk up the road. My peasant friend who, like myself, recognized the man as a Let, followed him a short distance. When he returned I asked, a Chekist, and he answered.
Certainly.
Putting a revolver in my pocket I hurriedly set off for the next village where in a schoolhouse I had arranged to meet my wife and a trusted friend. In the evening they came and we walked to a hamlet in the forest quite far from other settlements. Our friend, who had some relatives in the vicinity, introduced us as the engineer Danilov and Mrs. Danilov, who were in the country for rest and recreation after the excitement in Petrograd. For a week we stayed in this obscure place, walking, picking berries and mushrooms and reading Mommsen's Roman history in novels of Zagoskin. We had plenty of food, beautiful surroundings, and kind neighbors. After my wife and friend left, under the pretext of a visit to Ustiug, I remained intending to rest a few days longer. But in the evening a messenger came telling me that on the next day, if not that very night, the headhunters would be there.
Go to the village of X.
He advised, naming a hamlet about 15 miles distant.
At Y, 7 miles from here, you will be given the address of a peasant in X who will shelter you. But try to reach there at night that no one may see you.
If the headhunters were to reach my retreat that night I must not be found in the house, so I went to sleep in the bathhouse which every peasant of North Russia attaches to his dwelling. In the middle of the night I was roused by a rustling sound, so with revolver in hand I crept out of the bathhouse and ran to the forest. But the alarm turned out to be a false one. The rustling I heard was that of a peasant trying to steal some potatoes in the kitchen garden. No doubt he had been as frightened as I. Early in the morning I started for Y where I was to receive the address of the peasant to whom I was consigned. I had plenty of time, and as I trod the pleasant forest path listening to the bird songs, I came on a huge anthill and sat down to observe their communistic labors. What a wonderful communist organization they had, to be sure, with a palace whose architecture outshone Egyptian pyramids, Greek temples, medieval cathedrals, Eiffel's Tower, and even American skyscrapers. Not from Marx or other ignorant ideologists, but from these ants should the communists and socialists have learned their theories. If they could but transform the human race into ants, stop the processes of evolution, and bring the many into absolute slavery to the few, what an ideal communistic society they would create. But as long as human beings love freedom and independence, as long as they insist on progress, communistic aspirations must forever fail. About 9 o'clock I came near the village of Y, but as I skirted the wood I heard voices, so I halted behind a fir tree.
Have your peasants reaped their barley?
Somebody was asking. By his accent this was no local man, and I listened for the next words.
We just begin to harvest,
said a woman's voice. I peered through the branches and saw 7 fully armed Lettish soldiers walking along the path. I waited a few minutes, considering my best move. I heard cowbells tinkling, dogs barking, sheep bleating, voices of peasants, and then I heard a rifle shot. This meant that a guard had been left in the village and that I must keep in concealment still longer. It began to rain, my clothes were soaked through, and hunger gnawed at my stomach. Since morning I had nothing to eat but a few wild berries. I dared not light a fire or even warm myself by walking up and down. The only thing I could do was to exercise by squatting and rising, but this warmed me a little. 3 hours later I crouched down like a hare, hearing the tramp of the returning soldiers.
Escaped.
I heard one of them say, but another replied.
What does it matter? If this counter-revolutionary is indeed here, he will soon fall into our hands.
I decided that I would wait a few hours and then tramp to another village where I had a peasant friend. About 3 the next morning, benumbed and very hungry, I cautiously crept out into the road and by daylight I was safe in the house of my friend. At once he sent his son to Ustiug with a note from me asking my friends to find me some shelter in the town. Then I lay down to sleep, but in spite of the fact that I had not slept for 2 nights I lay wide awake. In my wet clothes as in a compress I felt myself growing feverish, and every few minutes I sat up in bed to listen. When my friend's son returned it was with this message.
At midnight be in the wood near the cemetery where we met before.
Midnight. Then I had but 5 hours in which to cross 24 miles of hostile territory. Putting on an old peasant coat, a dirty cap, an apron, and removing my glasses, I set forth. At 2 minutes before 12 I reached my destination but found no one there. I laughed softly, and quoted half aloud, just as the clock struck 12 Monte Cristo appeared at the appointed place. The answer to this was a subdued cough, and from the gloom where they stood my wife and one of my relatives came into the path. We moved silently towards my asylum, my wife begging me not to make the slightest noise, not even to sneeze after we arrived. The shelter proved to be a half-destroyed miserable hut so near to 2 small houses that I understood her anxiety. Nearer my hut was the cemetery. The hut, after I had crept into it and closed the flimsy door, was so low that I could not even sit up straight, but on the floor my friends had laid a felt mat, so stretching out on it I tried to go to sleep. But feverish thoughts filled my brain. This then was the revolution for which so many thousands had worked and dreamed. And here was I, a revolutionist, like a Girondist of the 18th century, obliged to wander in dark forests and rest at night in a graveyard. Crack. Rifles. 1, 2, 3. Executions. I remembered then that the place of execution was nearby, on the other side of the cemetery. Well, I said to myself, this hut has the merit of convenience. It is so near the place of eternal rest that I shall not have far to walk. In this feverish condition I spent the night. In the morning I found, to my comfort, that my wife had placed in a corner food, some books, and Bolshevist newspapers. Composing myself, I ate and read. But what frightful news! 428 executions in Yaroslavl by Bolshevist German forces. 15 counter-revolutionaries executed in Vologda. 7 shot in Ustiug, 2 of them peasants.
All who are not with us are against us. All are outlaws. Pitiless death for all capitalists, for all anti-Bolsheviki. Let us kill them all like poisonous snakes.
I read. The long day over I passed another sleepless night listening to the sinister crack of rifles on the far side of the cemetery. It was clear that I could not remain where I was, and I thought I might as well steal as far as Luza to the north where I would surely find shelter with the Syrian people. From there I might possibly get through to Archangel. Next night I stole to the house of my wife and accompanied by her went into a wood near the town. Sad were our hearts on this rainy night. I was like one wandering in a circle without any outlet. My troubles were but increased by the anxiety of my wife and friends, but I could do nothing to lighten their grief. Lonely in the wet darkness we spent an hour discussing in whispers my plans. My idea of going to the Syrian was voted down. To cross 300 miles of territory where I was known and where in every village were Bolshevik agents arresting each newcomer, was clearly suicidal. What other solution of my problem was possible? As though in answer to the question, the sudden bark of rifles interrupted our conversation. Oh, yes, this outlet could be, and perhaps it was the only one. Vainly I tried to console my wife, begging her to go home. Silently weeping, she embraced me and went away, leaving me alone and utterly desolate. The wood where I remained had been pretty thoroughly cut over, so I sat down on a stump and considered my desperate situation. In the morning people began to enter the wood to pick berries, hunt mushrooms, chop wood, and the devil knows what else. A boy spied me and stood still to watch. I pretended that I was a wood chopper. The boy, however, did not leave. Was he a spy? Sleepless nights, anxiety, cold and hunger had brought me to such a pass that at last I put all fears aside and directed my footsteps to the house of my friend on the edge of the town. If I am to be killed, let them shoot quickly, I said to myself.
Good God! How is it with you?
Exclaimed my friend. And then he gave me a glass of tea with cognac and prepared me a bed in his bathhouse. After 4 sleepless nights I fell dead asleep and for some hours was troubled by neither dreams nor apprehensions. In the evening, my hair cut and ragged beard shaved, I was led to another asylum which had been prepared for me. This was in a low space between the floor and ceiling of an attic, without any window or even any door. Here I lay down on a bearskin.
Like a king of old Scythia.
As my kind host smilingly said. In this hole I could neither read, write, nor do anything else but think. I turned my thoughts to the mechanism of human behavior, problems on which I had worked before the revolution. My present behavior, I thought, represents a definite complex of reactions. What are their stimuli, or what devils have brought me to this behavior of a bear in a den? Quite a proper reflection for a psychologist. For an hour each evening I left my cramped quarters to take food and to hear what news came through. Except for poor Dvigilny, who was in prison, all the other conspirators were, like myself, in flight and in hiding. It seemed that I might as well try to join them in an effort to reach Archangel, but first it was necessary to prepare maps and to wait until certain of the fugitives reached our locality. We were to start separately from Ustiug, meeting at an appointed place in the forest. In early morning, after 3 days of concealment under the low roof, I started out disguised as a worker looking for flour in the villages. About 30 miles from the town I came on my fellow fugitive, finding him in fairly good spirits and quite prepared, as I was, for whatever might happen. With difficulty we bought flour, onions, potatoes for 4 or 5 days, got an axe, a rifle, and a few cartridges, a porridge pot, a tea kettle, tobacco, needles, and thread. These we put in bags with a change of linen, 2 or 3 books, and some canvas for sleeping beds. The night we spent in a corn kiln, and next morning we started to the forest, 2 peasants guiding us part of the way. In the afternoon of the same day a red detachment galloped into the village to arrest us. But by that time we were far away.